I'm Mitch Mills. Today on HiiQ, we're going to be going over prototyping in Adobe XD, as well as taking a look at some useful tips and tricks to elevate your next web design into a digital delicacy. First off, prototyping is the act of simulating a finished working product. Regardless of the state of our projects, it's important that we prototype early and often. This gives us a basis to conduct user testing, which ultimately helps us create a better product in the end. Prototypes are also a great way for us to show our designs to our clients. It gives them a better context to explore our designs, to actually see it in application. Prototyping in XD is built around the idea of linking multiple artboards together. You can think of it from moving from picture A to picture B. So jumping into XD, we're just going to open up a 1920 by 1080 artboard. And we can find all of our prototyping tools up in the top left. You'll notice there is a design tab and prototyping tab. We're just going to click on prototyping. Because we actually haven't built a design out yet, you'll notice it gives us a little bit of a prompt. And this is kind of the basis of XD. The way we prototype is by linking artboards together. So we're going to move back to the design page here. And what we want to do is we're going to simulate a couple examples of how to link multiple objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box. I'm going to center it, make it color, black fill, a little easier to see. And what we're going to do is just simulate moving an object between two states. So an easy way to make sure everything lines up is just by copying the artboard over. I just did that by holding Alt and dragging the artboard itself. So on our second page, we're going to make the changes that we want. So I've simply slid the object over. Now moving back to our prototyping tab, we can see we're meted with a few different options. So on our first artboard here, clicking on the square, and I'm just going to drag this little blue arrow. Once I've done that, you can see we're met with a host of options. So the first thing we want to do is indicate a trigger, and this is how we're going to actually interact with this object. So tapping is essentially simulating a gesture on a mobile phone or a mouse click. Next up we have dragging. Dragging is the act of actually moving an object around the screen. And thirdly we have voice, and that is simply just going to recall a voice input that we have. You can see if we drag on the artboard itself, we're met with one more option, and that's time. And this is simply just going to start all of our changes after the allocated amount of time that we set. The one thing to note is if we are prototyping the actual artboard itself rather than an object, that trigger is going to cause every action to occur. We can't control independent objects. So one thing that is a little goofy, you might find if you try to drag the arrow itself, it won't actually remove itself. It won't do anything. So a good way to remove links that we don't want is to go back to the source artboard, grab the little blue box, and just drag it a little bit, and it'll remove anything we linked. So going back to that previous trigger that we set, which is a tap on the first box, take a look at the second thing that we can do, and that's the action itself. So the first one we have here is transition, and transition is simply going to shuffle between the two artboards. Second up, we have auto animate, and this is what we'll primarily be using. Thirdly is overlay. A good way to think of that is a pop-up or a video overlay, so the video getting a little larger so we can watch it. Fourthly, we have speech playback. That is the system just responding to something we've input with a voice. Last one is previous artboard, and this is just going to shuffle us back to the first destination we had. So next up, I'm met with a destination tab, and that's simply just directing our action to begin with. So in this case, we only have the two artboards, so the only option we have here is our number 2 artboard. It's really important to name our layers at this point so that we're not getting confused and misaligning things later on. Finally, we have animation. I'll quickly explain sort of the effects of these, but the best way to experience these is to play with them yourself. So none is going to be pretty linear. Everything's going to move at the same pace. Next up, we have dissolve, and that's just going to transition the opacity between the two artboards. So the top one's going to fade away and the second one's going to come in. Sliding left is going to take our first artboard as if it was on the right of our second one, and it's going to push it towards the left. Same with slide right being the opposite, and up and down. Pushing is a little different. The way to imagine that is two artboards are next to each other, and it's actually going to slide both at the same time rather than shuffling the first one on top of the second. So in this case, I'm just going to go to no animation. We want this to be just a click and simply transfer as if we're transferring between two pages. So now that I've finished that action, I'm going to click the little play button in the top right. You can see nowhere on the artboard I can actually interact with, but when I hover over the object that I've linked, it now gives me the cursor. When I click, it's going to transfer to that second artboard. And I'm going to quickly link it back. The nice thing with XD is it's going to preserve all of the settings that we had the last time we made an action. A good example of this is navigation bars. It allows us to quickly link all of our different pages together without having to redefine the action every time. So I'm quickly just going to link this object back and make sure if I go to the first artboard, back to the play button in the top right, you can now see that I can quickly just skip back and forth between those two objects. Going over to our action, I'm going to demonstrate how we can change the action and how it's going to influence the way that this interaction takes place. Moving to auto animate, we're given a new set of functions, and the first one you'll notice is easing. Easing is a way for us to kind of influence the way that that animation is going to take place. So easing out is going to start the action a little quicker and then get a bit slower. Easing in is the opposite. The action is going to start slow off the start and speed up. Ease in and out is going to make the animation start slow, get fast in the middle, and then slow at the end. Snapping is essentially an exaggerated version of easing out. It's going to be a little bit more aggressive, and it's going to be quite quick and then stop a little quicker than easing out would. Wind up is again an exaggerated version of easing in. Going to start really slow, almost pause, and then build up into the end of the animation. And last up we have bouncing, which is going to overshoot the animation a little bit and then eventually settle the object that we've changed. The second window we have here is duration, and this is just how long that animation is going to take place over. So I'm just going to quickly change it to 0.5 here, and again, going to that second object, I can quickly just change those settings by redragging the arrow. So notice here, the box just slides nice and smooth now instead of instantly transferring. So if I were to change the animation of bounce, for example, you'll notice the animation is a lot different back and forth. And we'll test out one more here. This is wind up. So our first animation will be bouncing and our second one will be wind up. And you'll notice how, again, it kind of influences that interaction. So moving back to our design page, we can do a lot of cool things with auto animating, mainly in the form of changing properties. So I'm going to quickly change the second artboard to be a circle rather than a square. And you'll notice without even touching the prototyping screen, it maintained all of the changes we made. So when we preview this, you'll notice the square now morphs into a circle and back and forth. There's a few limitations to this. For example, color. It will change color, but it won't be linear. It won't transition smoothly. You'll notice on the first time we click it, that's when that interaction comes to place. It just instantly transfers color rather than being smooth. Another cool property we can change quite easily is scale. So simply gonna make this circle a little bigger. Now you'll notice that the square also scales up to match the size of the second artboard. So this is the primary principle in animating. We're just linking two artboards together and we're changing between different states. So just gonna remove the second artboard and all the shapes we have, and I'm gonna demonstrate an interesting way we can use drag. Dragging works really well on desktop because it allows us to create a controller for actions. Think of a carousel or something we're swiping through. So I'm gonna quick build a slider bar here. Just gonna lay down a line, put a little circle on it. That'll be our main button that we can control. And I'm going to duplicate the artboard. Now, the one thing that's really important to note is the name of our layers. You'll notice I haven't been naming anything, but by duplicating the artboard, Adobe does a really good job at preserving those layer names. For example, if I were to go into my second artboard here, you'll notice that I still have ellipse 1, line 1, rectangle 1. It doesn't rename it to copy or version 2. So I'm just going to quickly change the second shape to a circle, and I'm also going to move the slider to the right. I'm going to select our main controller, which is the small circle that I drew, and I'm going to turn it into a drag function and auto animate. The nice thing with a drag function is we don't actually need to introduce easing, because the rate at which we drag the slider is what influences the animation that we created. And I'll just link that backwards. So you can now see when I drag that little circle, the top box is now moving and turning into a circle. Once again, we can influence a lot of different properties here. For example, rotation, scale, shape. I'll just redefine that. And if we go back to our prototype, you'll notice now the box is going to rotate and scale up. So for web, this is the basic use of sliding. It does expand past this. It allows us to hide objects, move things around, but primarily based around a controller. So I'm going to start one more artboard here. I'm going to illustrate the time function. So this one is based on the artboard itself. So if I go to the prototype screen, you notice I have the actual first artboard selected. And I'm just going to drag that to the second. My trigger is going to be time. I don't actually want much of a delay here, but we have auto animate selected, and I do want to change the easing a bit. So let's make that 0.5 seconds, drag that back. It again preserves our features. And we're going to press play in the top right. And it's a little drastic, it's a little quick. So by clicking that bar, we can go back into the duration, and we'll just make that a little slower. Let's increase that to 2 seconds. So again, going back to play, and notice we have much more easy transition here. And this is a good way to simulate, say, a loading screen or a action that we can't quite prototype, but we still want to illustrate to a client. That'd be a little more practical in, say, a presentation format. So it's one thing to play with boxes. It's another thing to make our designs actually come alive. So here I've created a quick sort of demo landing page for a quick campaign. And typical sections, we have our navigation, our main header area, and then a few content sections. The first thing we might want to be able to do is show a page that we can actually scroll. The nicest thing about Adobe XD is that we don't have to do anything special to make this happen. We simply expand the artboard. So for example, when we first create a new project, our artboard will be 1920 by 1080, and all we have to do is expand that vertically, and that's going to enable our page to actually scroll. Secondly, it's quite common for us to actually navigate through different pages. So here I've mocked up a quick contact page, and going into the header, we're just going to change the state of our actual active page simply by changing the color. And now that those look aligned, we can go into our prototyping menu. So clicking through my layers, just by double tapping, is going to dig deeper. Go and find that contact button that I've created, and I can make it now animate to our second page. So this is going to be tap, be clicking this link. I just want the page to load instantly. So transition, destination is going to be the contact page. The nice thing is it autofills when we drag the actual action. And we'll just animate this backwards as well. Again, preserves our settings, which is extremely nice. And there we have it. We can quickly view our pages and click through those two links. So going back to our prototyping menu, we might want to even add a few more. So these primary call to actions, we can link those back to the page. So we have a video, literally, and one thing that's common is full screen display. So a way that we can simulate that in XD is by using the overlay function. The setup is quite easy. We simply need to create an artboard that is the same resolution as our window. In this case, 1920 by 1080p. And we don't have to scale it up or anything to match our page. It's essentially going to lock in front of our view and become the new thing that we see. Looking at this video, you'll notice it's actually a layer mask. So the thing we want to actually change is our video. So to preserve the names, we're going to simply copy and paste that, Command C and Command V. And a lot of overlays seem to be dark, so we'll make this black background with a little bit opacity to it so we can still see some of that content behind. Using Command and the square brackets, we can change the order of our layers. So we're going to quickly pull that video on top, and we're going to scale it up a bit. So you'll notice the video itself is actually embedded in a layer mask. And this is a useful trick for cleaning up rough edges or hiding some content in a space that we want to define. So I'll show you quickly how to set that up. Firstly, we'll take the screen cap of a video that I have, and we're going to draw a square. And this is going to define the shape that we want. See here, we simply have the two layers, and we're going to move the rectangle that we want, just making sure that's on top. Select both, and using the shortcut, Command Shift and M, it's going to create a layer mask group for us. This is a really useful trick for a lot of our designs moving forward. Because I've reconstructed this, I just want to make sure all my layer names are the same. It's going to make sure that when I animate this, it's going to actually transition properly. So rectangle, I'm just going to name back to rectangle 2. Our video name would remain the same. And that is it for our setup. So going to our prototyping window, I'm going to go to our video, and we're going to click into our layer mask. I find sometimes when we make the action on the layer mask layer itself, sometimes things don't work quite right. I don't know if that's just a problem with XD or something I've done wrong. So you'll notice there's this green box at the top, and that's simply illustrating that we will have an overlay effect. So moving to our actual settings here, we simply want this to fade over top of what we already have. So we're going to change our action to dissolve, and we'll have it fade in nice and subtly. So we'll change our easing to ease in and our duration to about 1/3 of a second. And going to the artboard that we've created for overlay itself, the nice thing is it's going to auto link to the previous artboard. So anytime we click on that overlay, it's just going to put us back to the page we had. See here, if we were to drag the window, with the settings it uses is tap and previous artboard. And that gives us that little swoosh on the left-hand side. Moving to prototyping, window again. Let's see now when we click that video, it's going to create a nice overlay effect. As easy as that. So next up we have this little sliding element. Go back to my design tab here. The way I've constructed this is again using mask groups and some content that I've aligned horizontally. And the reason for that is it's going to allow me to scroll that content just as such. So there's a few ways we can navigate in this. So because we have multiple states, we're gonna have to create a few different artboards to achieve the desired effect here. 3 in total because I have 3 blocks of content. So first up, what we're gonna have to do is find that layer with our actual content, and we're just gonna shift that into our different positions. So in this case, I'm just gonna slide it into what we want each of those pages to look like. Another thing we have here is an indicator at the bottom, which allows users to know which page they are on and how many there are. So we're just going to quickly highlight the appropriate indicators. So on the second page, we'll have the second one lit up, and on the third. All right. Right, and that about does it for our setup. So now we can get into actually linking this together. So I'll start with these little arrows, and we're going to start. So our right one is going to bring us to our second page. Because we have an element moving, I want to use auto animate. And what this is going to allow is the object to transition rather than instantly jump around. So we'll put on auto animate and we'll add a bit of play to this. So we're going to change the easing to snap, and we'll increase our duration just a slight bit. So notice when I go down and test this, it might be a little quick. So we'll go back and we'll just increase our duration. Let's move that up. And now that we have that, we can link the rest of our arrows together so that we can click through all of these different states. So the second action we want to add here is dragging. So if I click into my layer, I want to find that group of content that I've created. And the reason for that is if we grab another object, it can't actually move. So we want to make sure that that huge content group that we have is the one that we're actually controlling. In the same way we did with the tapping, we're just going to go in and link all of those. Once we've set up the drag action, it'll auto link every time we set that up afterwards. So go into our prototype preview, we'll see that all of the buttons work. We'll jump a little goofily between the last and first, and that's simply because we haven't created pages to that transition. But again, it is just to illustrate the way something might work. All right, so last up, we have this sort of hidden navigation, this hidden footer. And we can use dragging in another cool way, and that is to slide things in and out of our actual display. So what I'm going to do is quickly just create a second artboard. I'm going to select that footer, and I'm just going to slide it back into our actual artboard. From our first one, we're going to grab that little tab that we want as our controller, and we're simply going to link the two pages together. So dragging it over to the artboard. Our trigger is drag. Again, because we're the ones controlling it, we don't actually need to add easing. And then linking that back. So if we go to our display, our preview for prototyping, we'll see that we can now grab this anchor and we can simply slide our footer up and down. So this is just a basic way in which we can use the prototyping tools in XD. If you have any questions or would like to see the way that this could be applied to a design that you have, feel free to comment down below. As always, like and subscribe. This series was filmed at Hiilite Creative Group Studio in Kelowna, British Columbia, and was made possible with the help of our creative team. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to check us out at hiilite.com.